Alright, what were we on to yesterday? We're 87. The Wart Meets a Giant. From the Sword and the Stone by T.H.White. In the evenings, except in the very height of summer, they used to meet in the solar after the last meal of the day. There the parson, Reverend Sidebottom, or if he were very busy over his sermon, then Merlin himself would read to them out of some learning book of tales. Can you lay down? To calm their spirits. It was glorious in the winter, while the big logs roared in the fire, the beech blue, flamy and relentless, the elm showy and soon gone, the holly bright, or the pine with his smoking scents, while the dogs dreamed the conquest, or the boys imagined those sweet maidens letting down their golden hair, so that their rescuers might save them out of their tower. But almost at any time of the year it was as good. The book they usually used was Gesta Romanorum, whose fascinating tales began with such provoking sentences as, there was a certain king who had a single partiality for little dogs that barked loudly, or a certain nobleman had a white cow to which he was extremely partial. He assigned 2 reasons for this. First, because she was spotlessly white, and next, because the boys, and for that matter the men, would sit as quiet as church mice while the marvels of the story were unfolded. And when the unpredictable narrative had come to an end, they would look towards Reverend Sidebottom, or Merlin, who was not so good at it, to have the story explained. Reverend Sidebottom would draw a deep breath and plunge into his task, explaining how the certain king was really Christ, and the barking dog zealous preachers, or how the white cow in the soul, was the soul, and her milk represented prayer and supplication. Sometimes, indeed, generally, the unfortunate vicar was hard to put to it to find a moral, but nobody ever doubted that his explanations were the right ones. And anyway, most of his listeners were soon asleep. It was a fine summer night, the last night which would give any excuse for fires, and a Reverend Sidebottom was reading out of his tale. Wart lay snoozing among the lean ribs of gay sounds. Sir Ector sipped his wine with his eyes brooding on the logs which lit the evening. Kay played chess with himself rather badly, and Merlin, with his long bearded saffron in the firelight, sat cross-legged knitting beside the wart. There was once discovered at Rome, read Reverend Sidebottom, through his nose, an uncorrupted body, taller than the wall of the city, on which the following words were inscribed: Pallas, the son of Evander, whom the lance of a crooked soldier slew, is interred here. A candle burned, it is said, which neither water nor wind could extinguish, until air was admitted through a hole made with the point of a needle beneath the flame. The wound of which this giant had died was 4.5 feet long. Having been killed after the overthrow of Troy, he remained in his tomb 2,240 years. Have you ever seen a giant? Asked Merlin softly, so as not to interrupt the reading. No, I remember. You haven't. Just catch hold of my hand a moment and shut your eyes. The vicar was droning on about the gigantic son of Evander. Sir Ector was staring into the fire, and Kay was making a slight click as he moved one of the chessmen. But the Wart and Merlin were immediately standing hand in hand in an unknown forest. This is the forest of the Bourbon Water, said Merlin, and we are going to visit the giant Galapus. Now listen, you are invisible at the moment because you are holding my hand. I am able to keep myself invisible by an exercise of willpower, An exceedingly exhausting job it is, and I can keep you invisible so long as you hold on to me. It takes twice as much willpower. But if, however, you let go of me even for a moment, during that moment you will become visible. And if you do it in the presence of Galapus, he will munch you up in 2 bites, so hold on. Very well, said the wart. Don't say very well. It is very well at all. Oh, it isn't very well at all. On the contrary, it is very ill indeed. And another thing, the whole of the beastly wood is dotted with pitfalls, and I shall be grateful if you will look where you are going. What sort of pitfalls? He digs a lot of pits about 10 feet deep with smooth clay walls, and covers them over with dead branches, pine needles, and such like. Then if people walk about and tumble into them, and he goes round with his bow every morning to finish them off. When he has shot them dead, he climbs in and collects them for dinner. He can hoist himself in and out of a 10-foot pit quite easily. Very well, said the wart again, and corrected himself too. I will be careful. Being invisible is not so pleasant as it sounds. After a few minutes of it, you forget where you last left your hands and legs, or at least you can only guess to within 3 or 4 inches. And the result is that it is by no means easy to make your way through a brambly wood. You can see the brambles are right, but where exactly you are in relation to them becomes more confusing. The only guide to your legs for the feeling in them soon becomes complicated. It is by looking for your footprints. These you can see in the neatly flattened grass below you, and as for your arms and hands, it becomes helpless. Unless you concentrate your mind to remember where you put them last. You can generally tell where your body is, either by the unnatural bend of a thorn branch or by the pain of one of its thorns, or by the strange feeling of centralness which all human beings have, because we keep our souls in the region of our liver. Hold on, said Merlin, and for glory's sake don't trip up. They proceeded to tread their tipsy way through the forest, staring carefully at the earth in front of them, in case it should give way, and stopping very often when an extra large bramble fastened itself in their flesh. When Merlin was stuck with a bramble, he swore, and when he swore he lost some of his concentration, and they both became dimly visible, like autumn mist. The rabbits upwind of them stood on their hind legs at this, and exclaimed, "Good gracious!" "What are we going to do?" asked the wart. "Well," said Merlin, "here we are at the Brambly Water. You can see the giant's castle on the opposite bank, and we shall have to swim across it. It may be difficult to walk when you are invisible, but to swim is perfectly impossible. Even with years of practice, you are always getting your nose under water. So I shall have to let go of you until we have swum across at our own time. Don't forget to meet me quickly on the other bank." The wart went down into the warm, starlit water, which ran musically like a real salmon stream, and struck out for the other side. He swam fast across and down river with a kind of natural dog stroke, and he had to go about a quarter of a mile below his landing place along the bank before Merlin also came out to meet him. Dripping, Merlin swam the breaststroke, very slowly and with great precision, watching ahead of him over the bow wave of his beard, with that faintly anxious expression of the faithful retriever. "Now," said Merlin, "catch hold again, and we will see what Galapus is about." They walked invisible across the sward, where many unhappy-looking gardeners with iron collars round their necks were mowing, weeding, and sweeping by torchlight. Although it was so late in what had begun to be a garden, they were slaves. "Talk in whispers," said Merlin, "if you have to talk." There was a brick wall in front of them, with fruit trees nailed along it. In this they were forced to climb. They did so by the usual method of bending over, climbing on each other's back, giving a hand up from on top, and so forth. But every time the wart was compelled to let go of his magician for a moment, he became visible. It was like an early cinematograph flickering very badly, or one of those magic lanterns where you put in slide after slide, The slave gardener, looking at that part of the wall, sadly tapped himself on the head and went away into the shrubbery to be sick. Hush, whispered Merlin from the top of the wall, and they looked down upon the giant in person, as he took his evening ease by candlelight upon the bowling green. But he's not big at all, whispered the wart disappointedly. He is 10 feet high, hissed Merlin, and that is extremely big for a giant. I chose the best one on you. Even Goliath was only 6 cubits in the span, or 9 feet 4 inches. If you don't like him, you can go home. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be ungrateful, Merlin. Only I thought they were 60 feet long, and that sort of thing. 60 feet, sniffled the necromancer. The giant had heard something at the top of the wall, and looked up towards them, remarking in a rumbling tone how the bats squeak at night. Then he poured himself out another hornful of Madeira, and tossed it off in one draught. Merlin lowered his voice and explained, people find the teeth and bones of creatures like your friend Atlantosaurus, and then they tell stories about human giants. One of them found a tooth weighing 200 ounces. It's dragons, not giants. They grow really big. But can't humans grow really big too? I don't understand it myself, but it is something about the composition of their bones. If a human was to grow 60 feet high, he would simply snap his bones with the weight of their own gravity. The biggest real giant was Alazir, and he was only 10 feet and a half. Well, said the wart, I must say, it is rather a disappointment. I don't mean being brought to see him, he added hastily, but that they don't grow like I thought. Still, I suppose 10 feet is quite big when you come to think of it. It's twice as high as you are, said Merlin. You would just come up to his navel, and he could pinch you up to a corn rick about as high as you can throw a sheaf. They had become interested in this discussion, so that they got less and less careful of their voices. Now the giant rose up out of his easy chair. He came toward them with a 3-gallon bottle of wine in his hand, and stared earnestly at the wall on which they were sitting. Then he threw the bottle at the wall, rather to the left, said in an angry voice, beastly screech owls, and proceeded to stump off into the castle. Follow him, cried Merlin quickly. They scrambled down off the wall, joined hands and hurried after the giant by the garden door. In the beginning, the downstairs parts were reasonably civilized, with green baize doors behind which butlers and footmen, though with iron collars around their necks, were polishing silver and finishing off their decanters. Later on, there were strong rooms, with ancient safes in them, that contained the various gold cups, prodigies, and other trophies won at jousts, and horse races by the giant. Next there were dismal cellars with cobwebs over the wine bins, and dreary-looking rats peeping thoughtfully at the bodiless footprints in the dust, and several corpses of human beings hanging up in the game cupboards, until they should be ready to eat. It was like the place for adults only in the Chamber of Horrors at Madame Tussaud's. At the very bottom of the castle they came upon the dungeon. Here the chalky walls dripped with greasy moisture, and there were pathetic messages and graffiti scratches upon the stone. Pray for poor Priscilla, said one, and another said, oh, if I had only paid for my dog license honestly, I should never have come to this pass. There was a picture of a man hanging from a gallows, with arms and legs sticking out like those of a Guy Fawkes in all directions, and another of a demon with horns. A fifth calf said, midnight sun for the 2:30. While a sixth said, aye, and a seventh exclaimed, alas, that I should have forgotten to feed my poor canary. Now I am in the same dreaded doom. A message which had been scratched out said, beastly old Gallopus loved Madame Mem, and the dirty hound. And somebody else had written, repent and be saved, from the kingdom of hell is at hand. There were kisses, dates, pious ejaculations, mottos such as waste not, want not, and good night, ladies. Also hearts with arrows in them, skulls and crossbones, pictures of pigs drawn with the eyes shut, and pathetic messages such as, don't forget to take the potatoes off at 12:30. The key is under the geranium. Revenge on me, stinking Galapus, by whom I am foully slain. Or merely Mazawati, mead for night starvation. It was a grim place. Ha, cried Galapus, stopping outside one of his cells. Are you going to give me back my patient, unbreakable helm, or make me another one? It's not your helm, answered a feeble voice. I invented it, and I patented it. And you can go sing for another one, you beast. No dinner tomorrow, said Galapus cruelly, and went on to the next cell. What about that publicity? Asked the giant. Are you going to say that the Queen of Sheba made an unprovoked attack upon me, and that I took her country in self-defence? No, I am not, said the journalist in the cell. Rubber truncheons for you, said Galapus in the morning. Where have you hidden my elastic stays? Thundered the giant at the third cell. I shan't tell you, said the cell. If you don't tell me, said Galapus, I shall have your feet burned. You can do what you like. Oh, come on, pleaded the giant. My stomach hangs down without them. If you will tell me where you put them, I will make you a general, and you shall go hunting in Poland in a fur cap. Or you can have a pet lion or a comic beard, and you can fly to America with an armada. Would you like to marry any of my daughters? I think all of your propositions are foul, said the sow. You had better had a public trial for me for propaganda. You are just a mean, horrible bully, said the giant, and went on to the next cell. Now then, said Galapus, what about that ransom, you dirty English pig? I'm not a pig, said the sow, and I'm not dirty. Or I wasn't until I fell into that beastly pit. Now I've got pine needles all down my back. What have you done with my toothbrush, you giant? And where have you put my poor branch yet? What? Never mind your branch yet, and your toothbrush, shouted Galapus. What about that ransom, you idiot? Or are you too steep in British sootiness to understand anything at all? I want to brush my teeth, answered King Pellinore obstinately. They feel funny. If you understand what I mean, and it makes you feel not very well. Amono Bistali, cried the giant. Have you no finer feelings? No, said King Pellinore. I do not think I have. I want to brush my teeth, and I am getting cramp, though sitting all the time on this bench, or whatever you call it. Unbelievable soot, screamed the master of the castle. What is your soul, your shopkeeper? Do you think of nothing but your teeth? I think of it lots of things, old boy, sang Pellinore. I think how nice it would be to have a poached egg. What? Well, you shan't have a poached egg. You shall just stay there until you pay me my ransom. How do you suppose I am to run my business if I don't have my ransoms? What about my concentration camps and my £1,000 wreaths at funerals? Do you suppose that all this is run on nothing? Why, I had to send a wreath for King Gwithno Garanhur, which consisted of a Welsh harp 40 feet long, made entirely out of orchards. It said, Melodious angels, sing thee to thy rest. I think that was a very good wreath, said King Pellinore admirably. But couldn't I have my toothbrush? What? Dash it all, really, it isn't much compared with a wreath like that, or is it? Imbecile, exclaimed the giant, and moved on to the next cell. We shall have to rescue him, whispered the wart. It is poor old King Pellinore, and he must have fallen into one of those traps you were telling me about. Well, he was after the questing beast. Let him stay, said Marilyn. A chap who doesn't know enough to keep himself out of the clutches of one of these giants isn't worth troubling about. Perhaps he was thinking about something else, whispered the wart. Well, he shouldn't have been, hissed the magician. Giants like this do absolutely no harm in the long run. and you can keep them quite quiet by the smallest consideration, such as giving them back their stays. Anybody knows that, if he has got himself into trouble with Galapagos, let him stay in it. Let him pay the ransom. I know for a fact, said the wart, that he hasn't got the money. He can't even afford to buy himself a feather bed. Then he should be polite, said Merlin doubtfully. He is trying to be, said the wart. He doesn't understand very much. Oh, please, King Pellinore is a friend of mine. And I don't like to see him in these bidding cells without a single helper. Whatever can we do? Cried Merlin angrily. These cells are for only lot. There was really nothing to do, but the magician's louder cry had altered matters into a crisis. Forgetting to be silent as well as invisible, Merlin had spoken too loudly for the safety of his expedition. Who's there? Shrieked Galpus, whirling round at the fifth cell. It's nothing, cried Merlin, only a mouse. The giant Galpus whipped out his mighty sword and stared backwards down the narrow passage, with his torch held high above his head. Nonsense, he pronounced. Mice don't talk in human speech. Ech, said Merlin, hoping that this would do. You can't fool me, said Galpus. Now I shall come for you. With my shining blade I shall see what you are, by ye or by nay. He came down toward them, holding the blue glittering edge in front of him, and his fat eyes were brutal and piggish in the torchlight. You can imagine that it was not very pleasant having a person who weighed 500 pounds looking for you in a narrow passage, with a sword as long as yourself, and the hopes of sticking it into your liver. Don't be silly, said Merlin. It is only a mouse or two mice. You ought to know better. It is an invisible magician, said Galpus. And as for invisible magicians, I slit them up. See, I shred their bowels upon the earth. See, I rip them and tear them. See, so that their invisible guts fall out upon the earth. Now where are you, magician, so that I may slice and zip? We are behind you, said Merlin anxiously. Look in that further corner behind your back. Yes, said Galpus grimly, except for your voice. Hold on, cried Merlin, but the wart, in the confusion, had slipped his hand. A visible magician, remarked the giant. This time, but only a small one, we shall see whether the sword goes in with a slide. Catch hold, you idiot, cried Merlin frantically, and with several fumblings they were hand in hand. Gone again, said Galpus, and swiped his sword toward where they had been. It struck blue sparks from the stones. Merlin put his invisible mouth right up to the wart's invisible ear and whispered, Lie flat in the passage. We will press ourselves one to each side and hope that he will go beyond us. This worked, but the wart, in wriggling along the floor, lost contact with his protector once again. He groped everywhere, but he could not find him, and of course he was now visible again like any other person. Ah, cried Galpus, the same small and equally visible. He made a swipe into the darkness, but Merlin had snatched his pupil's hand again and just dragged him out of danger. Mysterious chaps, said the giant. The best thing would be to go snip-snap along the floor. That's the way they cut up spinach, you know, added the giant. For anything you have to chip small. Merlin and the wart crouched, and hand in hand at the furthest corner of the corridor, while the horrible giant Galpus slowly minced his way toward them, laughing from the bottom of his thunderous bones, and not sparing a single inch of the ground. Click, click, went his razor sword upon the brutal stones, and there seemed to be no hope of rescue. He was behind them now, and had cut them off. Goodbye, whispered the wart. It was worth it. Goodbye, said Merlin. I don't think it was at all. You may well say goodbye, sneered the giant, for soon this chippy blade will rip you. My dear friends, shouted King Pellinore. My dear friends, shouted King Pellinore out of his cell. Don't you say goodbye at all. I think I can hear something coming. And while there is life, there is hope. Yah, cried the imprisoned inventor. Also coming to their help, he feebly rattled the bars of his cell. You leave those persons alone, you grimacing giant, or I won't make you an unbreakable helmet ever. What about your stays? Exclaimed the next cell furiously, to distract his attention. Fatty! I am not fat, shouted Galpus, stopping halfway down the passage. Yes, you are, replied the cell. Fatty! Fatty, shouted all the prisoners together. Fat old Galpus, cried for his mummy. He couldn't find his stays and down fell his tummy. All right, said the giant, looking perfectly blue in the face. All right, my beauties. I shall just finish these two off and then it will be a truncheonist for supper. Truncheonist yourself, they answered. You leave those two alone. Truncheonist was all the giant said. Truncheonist and a few little thumbscrews to finish up with. Now then, where are they? There was a distant noise, a kind of barking, and King Pellinore, who had been listening at his barred window while this was going on, began to jump and hop. It is! He shouted in high delight. It is! What is? They asked him. It, explained the king. Itself. While he was explaining, the noise had come nearer, and now was clamouring just outside the dungeon door. Behind the giant, it was a pack of hounds. Woof! Cried the door, while the giant and all his victims stood transfixed. Woof! Cried the door again. And the hinges creaked. Woof! Woof! Cried the door from the third time, and the hinges broke. Where's it out? Woof! Wow! Cried the giant Galpus, as the door crashed to the stone flags with a tremendous slap, and the beast, Galaticent, bounded into the corridor. Let go of me, you awful animal, cried the giant, as the questing beast fixed its teeth into the seat of his pants. Help! Help! Squealed the giant as the monster ran him out of the broken door. Good old beast, yelled King Pellinore from behind his bars. Look at that, I ask you. Good old beast. Loo. Fetch him along then. Old lady, bring him on then. Bring him on. Good old girl, bring him on. Bring him on. Then bring him on. Dead, added King Pellinore. Rather prematurely, bring him on dead, then. Bring him on dead. Then you are then. Good old girl. He lost, loo. What do you know about that for a retriever entirely self-trained? On her off, barked the questing beast in the far distance. On her off. And they could just hear the giant Galpus running round and round the circular stairs toward the highest turret in his castle. Merlin and the wart hurriedly opened all the cell doors with the keys which the giant had dropped, though the beast would no doubt have been able to break them down, even if he had not. And the pathetic prisoners came out blinking into the torchlight. They were thin and bleached like mushrooms, but their spirits were not broken. Well, they said, isn't this a bit of all right? No more thumbscrews for supper, no more dungeons, no more stench, sang the inventor. No more sitting on this hard bench. I wonder where I can have put my toothbrush. That's a splendid animal of yours, Pellinore. We owe her all our lives. 3 cheers for Galanticent, and the branchette must be somewhere about. Oh, come along, my dear fellow. You can clean your teeth some other time with a stick or something. When we get out, the thing to do is to set free all the slaves and to run away before the beast lets him out of the tower. As far as that goes, we can pinch the epinerages out of the way. Lordy, I shan't be sorry to see a nice fire again. That place fair gave me the romantics. Let's burn all his truncheons and write what we think of him on the walls. Good old Galantis. 3 cheers for Pellinore, 3 cheers for everybody else. Hooza. Merlin and the wart slipped away invisibly from the rejoicing. They left the slaves thronging out of the castle while King Pellinore carefully unlocked the iron rings from their necks with a few appropriate words, as if he were distributing the prizes on speech day. Glantazet was still making a noise like 30 couple of hounds questing outside the tower door, and Galapis, with all the furniture piled against the door, was leaning out of the tower window shouting for the fire brigade. The slaves giggled at him as they went down. Downstairs, the occupant of cell number 3 was busy collecting the Ascot gold cup and the other trophies out of the giant safe, while the publicity man was having a splendid time with a bonfire of truncheons, thumbscrews, and anything else that looked as if it would melt the instruments of torture. Across the corridor of the now abandoned dungeons, the inventor was carving a rude message with hammer and chisel, and this said, "Nuts to Galpus," the firelight and the cheering. The King Pellinore's encouraging remarks such as, "Britons never shall be slaves," or "I hope you will never forget the lessons you have learned while you were with us here," or "I shall always be glad to hear from any old slave how they get on in life, or try to make it a rule always to clean your teeth twice a day, combined to make the leave taking a festive one, for which the two invisible inventors were sorry to depart. But time was precious, as Merlin said, and they hurried off towards the Barbley water. Considering the things that had happened, there must have been something queer about time, as well as its preciousness, for when the ward opened his eyes in the solar, Kay was still clicking his chessmen, and Sir Ector was still staring into the flames. "Well," said Sir Ector, "what about the giant?" Merlin looked up from his knitting, and the ward opened a startled mouth to speak. But the question had been addressed to the vicar. Reverend Sidebottom closed his book about Pallas and son of Evander, rolled his eyeballs wildly, clutched his thinly beard, grasped for breath, shut his eyes, and exclaimed hurriedly, "My beloved, the giant is in him, who was formed free from all corruption. The wound from which he died is transgression of the divine command." Then he blew out his cheeks, let go of his beard, and glanced triumphantly at Merlin. "Very good," said Merlin, "especially that bit about remaining uncorrupted. But what about the candle and the needle?" The vicar closed his eyes again, as if in pain, and all waited in silence for the explanation. After they had waited for several minutes, Wart said, "If I were a knight in armour and met a giant, I should smite off both his legs by the knees, saying, 'Now art thou better of a size to deal with than thou were,' and after that I should swish off his head." "Hush," said Sir Ector. "Never mind about that. The candle," said the victor warmly, "is eternal punishment, extinguished by means of a candle, that is, by the passion of Christ." "Very good indeed," said Merlin, patting him on the back. The fire burned merrily, as if it were a bonfire which some slaves were dancing round, and one of the gazehounds next to the wart now went hidorf in its sleep, so that it sounded like a pack of 30 couple of hounds questing in the distance, very far away beyond the night-lit woods.